It is 6 o'clock, so we're going to get started right on time. So first, I will take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Katie Rogala. I'm the Manager of Community Programming here at Spence-Chapin. So to explain briefly what I do, I oversee all of our programs for adult adoptees, child adoptees, their families, basically our post-adoption services. So things like our Adoptive Family Playgroup, our Adoption Mentorship Program for adopted teens, those are all the kinds of programs that I oversee here at Spence-Chapin. So I'm excited to speak with you tonight about our a recent mask-making activity that we did with our mentorship group, and some lessons learned and how we went about this as a group and as an agency, and some possible takeaways for you, either as a parent or professional, ways that you can bring that into your own opportunities to do that with your child or clients that you work with. So I'm going to jump right in and get started. And if at any point you're having trouble hearing me or any visual complications, anything along those lines, please just let me know through the GoToWebinar pop-up on your screen. Okay. So I'll briefly let you know what our agenda for the evening is. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of walk through briefly some ages and stages. Tonight, we're really focusing more on teens, but I'm also going to touch a little bit on preteens and just what's going on for them at the ages that they are, both just developmentally in general and also as adoptees, and then jump into what mask making is and why it's relevant, especially to adoptees. And finally, I will be going through our mentorship adoption day, and as I mentioned, some of the lessons learned and what we saw as our outcomes. I'll be showing some pictures of some of the masks that were made that day, and from there transitioning into how you can make your own mask and what to expect, as well as, of course, I'll close at the end with some time for questions. So we're scheduled tonight from 6 to 7 p.m. I'm going to try and wrap up the content around 6:45 tonight so that there's plenty of time for questions. And, again, that's something you can do using your GoToWebinar pop-up is to type in your questions at the end. And also we'll wrap up a teensy bit early just so if anyone needs to leave early, they won't miss too much of the content. All right, so that being said, I'm going to jump right in and get started. Okay. So I'm going to start with ages 5 to 11. So as I mentioned, touching a little bit on preteens as well, and this even goes quite a bit younger than that. This is, of course, a large age range, and this is certainly not the hard and fast rules of what a child might be going through at that time, but we just want to get some context first for what we can expect for children in these kind of age ranges before we delve into mask making. So in terms of what is happening for children at ages 5 to 11, there is certainly a lot going on. As we know, preteen and teenage years are a tough time and a time to really figure out our own sense of identity. And certainly there's a bigger shift towards focus on peers as opposed to family, which has been more important up until this point. And then especially for adoptees, a growing awareness of the feelings of grief and loss, especially as it relates to adoption, although they may not be able to fully identify why or really understand what that means and how to relate to others in light of that grief and loss. So there's certainly more self-consciousness about differences, and this is absolutely something that might come forward in a mask-making activity. So some of the things that families can be doing to help support adoptees in this age and stage is to explore adoption together and separately, and to be exploring themes surrounding birth parents, ambiguous loss, normalizing different kinds of families, normalizing feelings related to adoption, and making sure that child always knows that they have permission to have feelings and questions and don't necessarily need to share those with their parents. This is an age where that ability to have some independence of their story, to be able to start to interpret their story in their own way, to have some more quiet personal time to process is absolutely normal and should be encouraged. So for children in this age range, some services that are particularly helpful for them are any kind of kids groups, adoption and culture camps, life book workshops, and for parents, of course, their own workshops and webinars. So these are things that are related to education, certainly, but also provide a lot of opportunity to process our own individual stories and our stories as adoptees, as part of the collective adoptee culture. Okay, so move forward to ages 12 to 18. So again, identity formation absolutely is continuing to occur, and they're starting to assert their independence. And will very likely be interested in searching for birth family, whether formally or informally, especially in the light of social media. Some sort of search is likely happening, whether parents are aware of it or not. So what families should be mindful of are providing their child with the opportunity to explore independently what adoption means for them. Certainly there would be parent participation and guidance, but again, that child is going to need increased time to also work on this on their own. And a big part of that might be role models, mentors, and peer support, especially peers and mentors who are also adoptees. And all information that parents have should be shared with their child so that it can be processed together as a family. And one of the tough things about being a parent in this age is the duality of parenting in this stage, in that you want to stay involved, but also leave plenty of room for your child to process their own story and their own feelings about being adopted. So in light of that, some post-adoption services that are helpful at this age are mentorship programs, which I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about our program in just a minute, but some other opportunities you may want to take advantage of are heritage and history trips, support groups, of course, always parent workshops and webinars to continue to learn and grow as a parent, and support groups both for parents of teens, parents of adopted teens, and for teens to be a part of their own peer support groups as well. Okay. So that's going to just provide us a little bit of context for today. We want to always keep in mind what's going on for our kids, just in this general stage of life, but also how adoption may or may not be influencing those things. So, of course, tonight we're talking about mask making. So I'm going to take a step back to just explore in a little more depth what mask making is. To some extent, it's pretty straightforward. It is, of course, making a mask. But I want to pull out a couple special things about why mask making is important and why it's relevant. So mask making is a therapeutic tool to reflect our inner and outer selves. So this is how the world sees me versus how I see me. There are parts of myself that are easily known to others, and there are parts of myself that are only shared with the people that I trust, or maybe not at all. And that's something that's true for everyone, but especially for teens, as they're balancing so many different parts of their identity at once. So that being said, as we're making masks, we really try to use the mask as much as possible to reflect that duality. So some people will, as you're looking at a mask, will literally split the mask in half, and one half represents my inner self, one is my outer self. It might be the inside of the mask is my inner self, and the outside is my outer self. But in some way to reflect those two senses of self, the world self and my inner self. So in terms of who should be making masks, generally it's a tool that's used with children who are middle school aged and up, because they will have just a little bit more understanding of the inner and outer self. But, of course, you can be flexible with this. You might have a child who's particularly mature who can do this at a little bit of a younger age. This can be done well through adulthood. And again, although we're focusing really specifically on adoptees this evening, it is something that is a useful tool for really anyone. We all have a different sense of self depending on who we're with and what part of our identity we're bringing to the forefront in any given moment. And this is something, a mask making activity, that can be done across environments. So it can certainly be done with a professional, with a parent. It can be done individually or with a group. That's one of the great things about this is it, in a lot of ways, is very open-ended. So you can really apply it to a lot of different people, situations, and again, depending on your child that you're working with in particular, they may be more comfortable doing this one-on-one, or may be really helpful for them to do this as a group process and then process together when that's over. So why is mask making relevant to adoptees? We've already been touching on this quite a bit, but it's no surprise that adoptees often struggle with identity and feeling as though they're between worlds. And this can look like a lot of different things. It might mean feeling like I belong to more than one race or culture, country, especially if they're an international adoptee, more than one family. I may have been born with a different name than is my name now that I am adopted. So maybe very literally feeling like they are sharing two different identities. And these are very complicated things to manage and to handle and to understand at any age, but certainly as a child or as a teenager. So this is something that is a really helpful tool for adoptees to kind of visualize their different identities and understand the different pieces of themselves. Many adoptees feel that there are parts of themselves that they can't easily share with others, especially others who are not adopted, who just may not get it. So something we hear a lot from the tweens and teens in the mentorship group is feeling scared to speak to their parents about issues such as how much they think about their birth mom, and just being concerned, what if I hurt my parents' feelings? Or what if they just don't get it? What if they are offended? What if it's not okay to feel that way? Or, maybe they try to help, but they just really don't understand what it is to be adopted and what it is to live between these two worlds and to struggle in this kind of a way. And so just not feeling like it's a comfortable conversation to have. So, again, this is a mask is a nice way to take some of that pressure off the conversation and to be able to channel all these different things that they're feeling and experiencing into a concrete and tangible tool that they can use to explain themselves more easily. So as we certainly touched on already, children in middle school and high school are already working through complex identity issues, as any child would be at this age. Identities such as their place in relationships, sexuality and gender identity, their future plans. These are all very normal things for this age range. And adoption is yet another very complicated layer on top of that to make sense of. And finally, as I had kind of mentioned already, that MaskMaking is a great concrete tool to explore these multiple identities and will also help the parent or professional who's working with that child understand where their child is in their adoptee identity journey. This is a nice area for the parent or professional to assess, where are the areas where my child is feeling confident and feeling good about themselves and their identities as an adoptee, and where are the areas where they're needing a little bit more from me, a little bit more support, a little bit more information. Anything that we can do to help clue us into that will always be helpful. So all that being said, I'm going to go into a little more specifics with our most recent mentorship adoption day, which just occurred this past November, and explain a little bit more about the activity that we did and some of the outcomes from that as we did our own MaskMaking activity as a group. So I'll start off by giving a brief synopsis of the mentorship program that we have here at Spence-Chapin. So the mentorship program is for adopted children in 6th through 12th grade. And of course, they're all adopted. And our mentors are adults who are also adopted. And we meet monthly throughout New York City. There's months that we meet here at Spence-Chapin at our Manhattan offices, and months that we meet offsite doing recreational activities in the community to be building relationships. And for those months that we're on site at Spence-Chapin, we're really focusing on activities such as this, where we can explore our adoption identity, whether through games, crafts, activities, discussion, and we really take that opportunity to share our own stories of what it means to be adopted and the areas we're struggling, as well as the areas where we hope to be able to support others. So all that being said, we just had our adoption day in November. So again, this is a day where we're focusing more heavily on adoption identity. And another thing that makes an adoption day really special is that parents are also there on every adoption day. So they are also engaging in similar activities to what the children are doing, although in a separate area of the office, so that the children have a chance to share more freely. And we decided that we wanted to do a MaskMaking activity for this particular adoption day. So both mentees and mentors as a group and the parents had their own MaskMaking activity to be completed. So you'll see in the picture here, this is some examples of the masks that our mentees and mentors made. So they had these physical masks that you see here in this picture, and we used markers, magazines, feathers, stickers, etc., to put these together. And we made sure that we had time to share in small groups had time to share in small groups what our masks meant to us, but also had time to share with the group in its entirety towards the end of the day. And for parents, they were also doing a mask making activity, but theirs was a little different in that they had paper masks. They actually were given two printout of a mask, and they were asked to create one for themselves and one for their child. We wanted them to have the opportunity to sit with their own duality and their own different identities, but also to take an opportunity to think about what might your child come up with? What are the areas where you think that they think are very open to the world and things that people easily know about them? And what are the areas that are a little more personal and private for them? And parents were also using markers, colored pencils, etc. And of course, we gave a lot of freedom for both groups in how exactly they wanted to create their masks, what tools they wanted to use, whether they wanted to just use colors, words, phrases. So we're excited to see what they would come up with. So I'm going to, in the next couple slides, go through some of our masks and show you exactly what they came up with and pull out some themes that I thought were really interesting to give a little bit more of a sense of what a mask making activity could look like and what some of the outcomes might be. So on this first slide here, I've done some close-ups of a few of the masks that we had from our adoption day. And there were a few things that I wanted to pull out here that I thought were particularly interesting. So first, you'll see there's a lot of cultural and ethnic symbols, which reflect that duality of belonging to two cultures or two countries. So as an example, the first mask that you see on the far left at the very top of the forehead, it might be a little difficult to see, but says Latina, and then across the mouth says Americana. The third from left, and actually also the fourth from left, in the top row, you see there is a child who is of Colombian heritage, so one of the eyes has a Colombian flag above it. Next to that is the American flag. And she has also indicated there's a part of her that's Spanish speaking that maybe is a little bit more internal and that others don't necessarily know about her right away. The one top row in the far right, actually, was actually by one of our mentors, and she has shown over one eye has the Star of David to reflect the Jewish culture of her adoptive family, but also has quite a few symbols that are representative of her Kazakh culture, ethnic culture. So she has also shown the duality between her birth culture and her adoptive family culture and how she is simultaneously both of those things. And the final one I'll draw your attention to is the last one, where you can see on the forehead there's an American flag and also a Korean flag. So this is obviously from a Korean adoptee who is aware simultaneously of these two cultures that he shares, his Korean identity and his American identity. So I actually have a lot more masks to show, so I'm probably going to move us forward for the time being. But I thought this was just some good examples of some of the things that might come up and drives home that point that we've been talking about of just belonging to two different cultures and how difficult that can be. All right. So as I mentioned, we're going to be showing a few more masks. This is a few of us on Adoption Day with our masks. And I will be going through and sharing some of the different themes and things that came up through this activity with you. Okay, I'm going to draw your attention to the mask on the right, which is actually from one of our mentors who I think did a really phenomenal job with this activity. I thought his was one of the most interesting ones, I think, that came up from this assignment that we did together. So to explain his mask a little bit to you, you can see on one side he has the American sense of self on the left side of the mask, where he's given himself more Caucasian features such as blonde hair and a lighter eyebrow. And then on the right side is reflective of his Korean culture. He has the Korean flag, has given himself dark hair, dark eyebrows, and has also cut out a picture of a more typically Asian eye that he put over the eye hole. And he very much feels the duality and was able to share that with the group of feeling very much on the inside, like a kind of all-American, Caucasian individual, but then also sharing this Korean identity and having a hard time, especially growing up, figuring out how those two things could coexist. And you see he separated his mask with puzzle pieces to show how these things all kind of fit together and the struggle to make those pieces fit together. And at the very top of his mask, he showed the divide between the two and the big question mark of kind of who am I? Am I Korean? Am I American? And has put this chameleon on top, which I thought was a really brilliant idea, to show how, depending on environments, he is able to be both things, and he has to kind of live between those two worlds. So I thought a really beautiful representation and a great example of what a mask can bring out. This mask on the left side, it's actually also by one of our mentors. Something she did that was really different, but I thought also was a great idea. As you see on the right side, which is her outer self, she brought in actually her own makeup and did her mask's makeup, which again I thought was a really interesting and really cool idea. I think that could be really fun to do, especially if you have a child that you are working with or parenting who really enjoys makeup. I think that could be a really cool tool to bring into the experience. And you see on the left, she's written down some words about her inner thoughts of feeling different. She's written why, who am I really, where do I belong, and some question marks, and just showing that even though on the outside she has this confident demeanor, on the inside she really struggles to understand her place in the world and some of the larger questions surrounding her adoption story. Okay, and I'm also going to draw out a few themes from the mask on the right on this slide. Because I think this particular adoptee has brought up some really common themes for adoptees and things that they wonder about. So one of the things I really think was great that he has written down is the leave me, don't leave me duality of being an adoptee, of wanting his space and wanting his independence, but also kind of having that fear, that ever-present fear of, is someone going to leave me again? Is there really permanency? Can I really count on the people who are with me? And can I really count on my family? Because for me to have this family, I also had to be given up by another family. And you see above that, he's also written the real family. And of course, that's something that all adoptees struggle with. And something that adoptees hear often is that your real family? Is that your real mom? It's a theme we talk about a lot in the mentorship program, and struggling with that of the realness and the permanency of his family. Right. And one of the final masks that I'm going to draw to your attention is the one on the left, which is also one done by a mentor. The one on the right is by one of our kids. And so a couple of things I thought were particularly interesting about his mask. First of all, you can see across kind of the nose and mouth area the two different flags. On the one side, he has his Colombian heritage represented, which is his birth culture. And on the right, he has the Italian flag to reflect his adoptive family culture. He has a red pom-pom on the nose to reflect himself as a clown, as someone who loves to make people laugh. But in his debrief with the group as we sat together, he was also able to verbalize that, sometimes that can be a coping mechanism of finding a reason to laugh, because otherwise life can be pretty tough to deal with sometimes. And even themes of adoption can be hard to deal with sometimes. And he's also written some things about himself, such as that he tends to overthink, have his head in the clouds, but he also has these things that keep him grounded, such as his faith and family. So this is just a few quick examples of masks that came forward from our most recent adoption day and our mask making workshop. And I hope it was helpful to show a few of these to you, so you can see the many different things that came out and came up for people, and the different representations and the way that both kids and mentors went about this. I always think it's so interesting to think about everyone was given the exact same assignment, but everyone comes up with such a vastly different product based on what's on their mind and what they're going through in the moment. And certainly you see the mentors as adults have perhaps a little bit of a greater understanding and introspection into what that means for them, where some of our kids, their themes were a little more chaotic and a little more symbolic, whereas our mentors are able to write things in a little more clearer way. So some just very interesting themes that came up for us and some really beautiful products as well. Okay, so I'm going to jump into some tips for making your own mask. And then I'm also going to get into some of the barriers that can come up for mask making and what to do if you have a child who either doesn't want to participate or even a child who has some more serious themes come up, some deeper themes come up, because certainly that was something that happened at our adoption day. So I'm going to get into first the more tangible logistics of how this happens, but then again touch on some of those issues as well. All right. So for preparing to make your mask with your child or client, so as I mentioned before, it can be something either drawn on a piece of paper, it can be a picture, it can be a Google image of a blank mask, or it can be a physical mask as we gave to our mentees and mentors, easily purchased at craft stores, on Amazon. Luckily, it's something that's pretty easy to obtain. And some ideas for decoration. You could provide magazines for collaging, markers, colored pencils, paint. We didn't go the paint route just to save ourselves the mess, but I think that can be a really great tool as well. Of course, you can use stickers, and as I mentioned, one of our mentors had the great idea to even bring in makeup, which is also a great symbol when you are thinking about masks. And when you're using makeup, you are accentuating the parts of yourself that you want people to notice and trying to downplay the parts that you don't. And I think that could also make for a really interesting discussion with your child as you're making a mask together. And as you saw in the mask that I had shown, the participant can use literal words and phrases. For example, one of our mentors was writing out, I feel different, I wonder why. Or there are plenty of people who also just use colors and symbols that maybe only made sense to them, and that's okay too. And again, it's really whatever comes to mind, whatever is in your heart and in your mind can all come out in whatever way makes sense to you. And finally, you may just want to show some examples of masks. Can easily be done through Google search, books, other resources. The picture here is of some books that we have at the Spence-Chapin offices that could be used for inspiration. And I also kind of like the idea of talking together about historically, what do masks mean, or culturally, what do masks mean? What do we use masks for? I think you could have some really great discussion around that, and just almost make it a lesson plan of sorts. You could even go to a museum to see masks. So again, I think you can make this kind of an ongoing exploration of what masks mean and how people have used them before or as part of the process for making your own mask. So as you are preparing to make your mask, some things that are important is to really set the stage with your child. So I think it is really important to be explaining the purpose of a mask. And as I mentioned, maybe part of that is talking about cultural implications of a mask, historical implications of a mask, asking them to explain what is a mask, and both literally and figuratively. And I think just to help them understand why this is relevant, why it's important. Explaining logistically the different ways it can be created. So, as I mentioned before, you can split a mask in half by maybe drawing a squiggle down the middle. You can do the inside of the mask as one side of yourself, the outside as the other. Or maybe there's a totally different way your child would want to create it, and that's all okay. They have a lot of free reign with this. And I think also, even before you get started, kind of exploring sharing with one another once you're done with your mask. And certainly you don't have to share. I think that's an important thing to let that child know. Don't need to share everything, but maybe there's one small piece of information that child can tell you about their design choice, even if it's as simple as, why did you choose that color, or what does that picture mean? Or you can ask them, can you just share with me one small thing about your mask? It is a very personal activity, so if they don't want to share everything, that's okay. But I think there should be some expectations set ahead of time that there'd be some level of sharing going on. And if they're not willing to share exactly what's on their mask, at least maybe have a discussion around what was this activity like for you? Was it uncomfortable? Did you feel excited about it? Was it scary? And just talk about it in those more general terms. And this last bullet point here is just to say, as is appropriate and possible, we'd encourage that you do the mask activity with the child or teen that you're working with or that you're parenting. Something I definitely learned through doing this activity is what a vulnerable activity it is for kids. And really for anyone, even our parents, our mentorship parents struggled with this activity to some extent. It felt like a very raw activity for them, and it's very difficult to acknowledge those parts of yourself that we work hard to keep hidden from others, and we don't want to make known to others, and bringing that to the surface and talking about it can be really scary. So I think it is important that we do it together. I think their kids really appreciated knowing that their parents were also doing this activity, even though in our particular setup, they weren't doing it next to each other, alongside each other, but just for kids to know, it's not just me putting myself out there. We're all going to be a little uncomfortable today and putting ourselves out there. There's a lot of comfort in that. So doing it together feels much less scary, and I think can also be a great bonding activity. So that being said, as I mentioned, I'm going to get into a little bit more about what you should expect as you're doing this with a child, what might come up, and how to address maybe some possible barriers that would arise. So as I kind of started to mention, I was surprised to find when we did this activity with the mentorship group that it was a lot more emotionally charged than I expected. And really for the reasons I just mentioned, it is a lot to talk about those things that we actively try to keep hidden from others. And this was a very relevant activity for our kids in the mentorship group. They are certainly thinking about and working through identity in many different ways. And this really hit close to home for them, which is a good thing because it created some really amazing discussion. But it was also really hard. It was really hard to talk about. So we saw kind of everything on this slide that you see here were things that we saw in mentorship. So there were kids who didn't want to share their final product. And in mentorship, we certainly never require that anyone shares. Just ask them to be respectful as others share. And I will talk a little bit more on the next slide about how you could work through that with a child. And then we definitely had some kids who had some more complicated and emotional themes come up. Things like, I don't belong anywhere. No one wants me. Again, I will touch on this a little bit more in a few slides, but things that were hard to sit with and hard to hear, to know that our kids were going through some really tough things. And I think one of the important things to remember is just understand that they have to feel comfortable in order to share these kind of things with you. So know that they feel like this is a safe space, and honor that and normalize and really provide as much support as possible. We also had plenty of kids who were more interested, seemingly at the moment, in the artistic process and the introspective process. Many kids who just seemed a lot more interested in picking the perfect color or the perfect sticker, much more so than really thinking through the themes and thinking through the prompts of what could possibly go onto their mask. And admittedly, in the moment, that felt a little discouraging. I was hoping that they were really getting something out of this activity and enjoying it and benefiting from it in the way that I hoped they would. But I will also say that even those kids, as we sat down together and shared as a group, anyone who was willing to share, discovered pretty quickly that although they hadn't consciously been thinking through, what does this mean to me? What does this color mean for me? Or this picture mean for me? This symbol mean for me? As they really sat and considered their mask, they realized that it actually said a lot more about them than they even realized. And they still had some really wonderful insight to share with us. So I think, that's something that I understand feeling the discouragement if that seems to be what's going on, but understand whether they're conscious of it or not. There's a reason behind every choice that they're making in the design of their mask. So there is still a therapeutic process going on. They just might need a little bit more prompting and support to really understand why they chose what they chose and what that looks like for them. So something that's really important in light of all this, and as I mentioned, there were moments as we were doing this project together, even as a staff member, that I had to be prepared and to handle my own emotionality and to remain neutral. because this can be emotionally charged for a lot of kids. As I mentioned, it was a really raw activity for a lot of the kids, for the parents, and it was so important for both the mentors and the staff to absolutely stay neutral, to ask questions, to avoid attributing any values to what is shared, but to really just make sure we were building a safe space for this to be shared, to normalize what we were hearing and provide support. And especially for parents who may be listening, that can be really difficult to hear some of the things that might come up in this kind of activity. But something that we always say is really helpful is to really listen for the feelings behind the words. So you may hear or learn more than what you were expecting through doing an activity like this, but it's important to not just take everything at face value, but to really consider and listen to what's really being said. So I will get into that a little bit more in a moment, but would encourage you to try as best as possible to stay neutral and to be open-minded and accepting of whatever is shared through this process. So you'll see on this slide, this was one of the more interesting masks, I would say, that came about as part of our adoption day, and one of the tougher masks that came about. So you see with this mask, the child who created this had ripped it up and had written some pretty heavy words on it, such as mistake, feeling like she was a mistake. She wrote the words messed up and ugly. Some really tough things that she was going through as she was considering her inner and outer self. And this was a tough activity for her to do because she really feels this very deeply and feels very deeply like there's a strong inner self that is so hard for her to share with others. And we talked actually a lot in our group about that word mistake. She was not the only child who put that on their mask, of feeling like I wasn't wanted, I wasn't planned, I, in some way or another, should not have been conceived, I should not have been born, and you can imagine what a weight that is to bear. So as much as that was a tough thing to hear and to know that that's something that our kids are struggling with, it is also really an honor and a privilege to be able to create that safe space for them where they're able to share that and to also normalize that there are other children and other adults even in the room who also have had that thought and feel that way. But to then be able to support one another and provide encouragement to one another and to understand that you are not a mistake, you are loved, you are wanted. But again, adoption can bring forth some very complicated feelings. And I know for this child in particular, things that she wouldn't easily share with her parents. So we are very honored to be able to be those people that she feels comfortable to share that with. And this was a very therapeutic opportunity for her to put all these words and these tough things that she feels out into the world, and to know that she's still accepted. So that being said, I'm going to delve into some other potential special considerations for doing this activity. And I apologize at this point if I'm going a little fast. As I mentioned, I'd like to try and wrap us up around 1:45, so we have plenty of time for questions. So I apologize if I go too quickly. You can always let me know to slow down, or we can revisit in our last few minutes. All right, so a couple things that I do want to touch on specifically. So you might be working with a child who has been or is currently in the foster care system as you're doing this. So some of the themes that come up for that child might be a little bit more about permanency, such as that mask that we saw earlier about, it was from one of our mentors, working through issues related to his real family and having that back and forth between, I don't want you here, but please don't leave me. And that's certainly a theme that can resonate for foster care children. Wondering, is there something I can say or do that will jeopardize my family, jeopardize my permanence? You may see themes related to that kind of uncertainty and insecurity, wondering where they belong, where is my true home, and is it okay to feel simultaneously part of one family or culture and another one at the same time? And these are some more specific foster care themes that might come up. So just kind of some things to keep in mind, and also possibly some prompts to give when talking about doing this mask with a child who's in foster care, is maybe that's something you would ask, is in terms of your inner and outer self, are those the kind of things that you might think about or worry about? Okay, for international intertransracial adoption. So you saw actually that come about on quite a few masks that we saw already today, some themes around belonging to two different countries, two different cultures, feeling white on the inside and Korean on the outside for an adoptee who is of Korean descent but raised by a Caucasian family. And again, I would just expect in adoption that situation, either international or transracial, that is a theme that will come up, and you will probably see exactly that, symbols like we saw of different flags or different races being represented. And I would also make a point of asking those children more specific prompts in that direction of, it's again something we talk about a lot in mentorship, about feeling one race on the outside and one on the inside. And do you maybe walk into a certain neighborhood and people assume that you speak Spanish because they see that you have a Hispanic or Latin look to you? And so those are all things that I would be interested to kind of talk through together as I was working with the child in that particular adoption situation. And the final piece that I had on here was related to little or no information about birth family, which unfortunately is a common theme and can be really difficult. And I think the way that you'll see that manifest itself in a mask is a child who's really wanting to fill in the missing pieces. And, of course, it's very common to wonder and worry about information, to feel frustrated with the not knowing. And a child in this situation may be thinking things like, is it okay to feel what I'm feeling? Is there something that my parents are not telling me, something that they're hiding from me? Certainly, for parents in this situation, this can be really difficult. Parents may have more information than they've shared with their child. And, certainly in mentorship there are a few children who are in that situation, and they know, they feel it, they can tell that there's pieces that are not being shared with them. And that's something that's very hard for them to sit with and creates a lot of fear and anxiety around, why is it not being shared? How bad is it really? So some of the things I would want to ask a child who has little or no information about birth family is just, what feelings are you feeling? Are you feeling anxious, scared about what that information could be? What do you hope or suspect that the answers to your questions might be? Who do you share these feelings with? How do you deal with the not knowing? These are all some great prompts that can be brought about to tease out that fear and anxiety around not having much information, if any, about birth family. I think just one more thing I'll make note of is the general identity questions that you might want to ask about. Is asking a child in preparation for an activity like this to think about what parts of yourself might come from your biological family and what parts from your adoptive family. That's a really interesting question to consider as an adoptee. And some of the things adoptees are definitely wondering is just, who am I? And am I a culmination of the best or the worst of my adoptive parents? And again, these are also just some interesting discussion points you could be exploring through this activity. Okay. And as we wind down, I'll go through some barriers to mask making. And I'm pretty sure we heard all of these at our mentorship adoption day. So the first was just, I don't want to do this. Not uncommon when you're talking about working with teens and tweens, to just not be interested, not be invested. And the good news is that's okay. Not every child would be interested in doing something like this. So, what I would be interested to do with a child like that is to maybe explore a book or a website of mask projects together, to look at other people's masks, even if that child is not interested in doing one for themselves. So maybe we could look at a picture of a mask and say, what do you think that the person who created this mask was thinking or feeling when they made this? And once we've identified some of those feelings, I would ask, can you relate to any of those feelings? Have you ever felt that? Or maybe you would ask them to create a mask for someone else. So that could be maybe for their parent, whether adoptive or biological, a friend, someone their age. You could even do a mask for a past or a future version of yourself. That might take some of the pressure off of doing one for yourself right now in this moment. Understanding that can be a really vulnerable place, maybe putting the pressure or the focus on someone else or on a different version of ourselves to alleviate some of that. And if they are able to do that, then I think you could have a great discussion about what tells them that this person they're picturing would feel that way. Or perhaps if you've created your own mask, you could share your mask with them. So even if they're not interested in doing it, you could show them your project and explain why you put what you put on there, whether it be symbols, colors, and share a little bit more of yourself. And you could say things like, I put this on the inside because sometimes I'm scared to reveal this part of myself. Can you relate to that? And what advice would you have for someone with a fear like that? So all ways of still getting the same concepts of this activity, even if that child is not interested in doing it for themselves. And I also really love the idea of doing like a family mask. So that could be one of two things. It could be we create a mask to represent our family, or maybe we'd make one mask for each member of our family. And I think that would be a really fun way too to explore what this means. And again, take some of the pressure off of themselves as an individual, thinking about, what are the parts of your family that people know about you easily, and what are the parts that you might only know from being a part of the family and from living in your house. And, again, I think it could be fun to do one for your mom, one for your dad, one for brother, one for sister, and tease out those different members of the family. I think could also be a really fun way to make this activity feel a little bit more accessible. All right, so the next barrier I have in here is just, I don't like arts and crafts. I'm not a crafty person, not into this. So for that child, I would just let them know this is not about being artistic. It's just about you and your feelings. You can just write words if you want. You can just use stickers or pictures. You can even just use colors. It's really completely up to you. And just letting them know it's not about being a Picasso, being an artist. It's really just about the expression of it, and they have free reign to do whatever they want to do. And then sometimes you have that kid who says, I don't think this really applies to me. I feel like I'm kind of the same inside and out. What you see is what you get. So I think for that, I would probably make a little bit of a joke about it and just kind of say, like, that's amazing, because most people I know have some part of themselves that they don't show to people right away. Or people act a little differently at home than when they're at school or with their friends. And do you think that's true for you too? And of course you can lend a little bit of yourself and say, I know for me, I am like this at home, but when I'm with my friends or when I'm at work, I'm like this. And just normalize and help them understand it doesn't have to be a dramatic difference necessarily, but just we all are kind of chameleons and adapt to the environment that we're in, and normalize that for them. And hopefully that'll help them understand some of the ways that they might be a little bit different across environments and with different people. All right. So as we wind down, I just want to share some other tools and resources that might be helpful to keep this conversation going. There's certainly adoption books and mask-making books in particular that can be really helpful. So the one I have on here is Beneath the Mask, Understanding Adopted Teens. And that's a great resource for professionals and parents. And it's really understanding, it's not necessarily specific to mask making, although that's definitely explored as a way to tease out adoption identity in adopted teens. But it really does go into much more depth into the different identities that a teenager, an adopted teenager specifically, is managing at that stage in their life, in a really helpful and accessible way. And the great news is that CASE, the Center for Adoption Support and Education, who published that book, also has a workbook that goes with it that can be used with teens and with preteens as well, that gives some great activities and prompts and writing ideas for teens to use as they are in the process of making their own mask and exploring their own identity. It's really beautifully done, and it's a great resources. I think it's a great next step. Since this was a very general overview in this webinar, I would definitely recommend picking this up if it's something you want to know more about. And of course, some other just general resources, lifebook workshops, which are a way to kind of make a scrapbook of your own adoption story, your family's adoption story. So it's the same concept of making a really physical, tangible representation. Lifebook is a little different in that it's more of a timeline of your adoption story, but certainly themes of adoption identity are very much in there and come out in really beautiful and profound ways as they do with a mask. So I think that would be a great workshop. We do actually have one coming up here at Spence on Saturday, March 24th. So I'm certainly happy to share more information if anyone's interested. And of course, just generally being involved in the adoption community and being in community with other adoptees and understanding that whatever your child is thinking or feeling in terms of their adoption identity and how they see their place in the world, they are certainly not alone. There are others who feel the same way and others who would love to support them and talk to them about it. So that can be adoption support groups, a mentorship program. Luckily, there is really a wealth of opportunities to be involved in that community. And finally, if need be, certainly clinical services, either one-on-one or as a family, to really hash out those themes of adoption and identity in a much more therapeutic and intensive lens. And one more thing I do really quickly want to mention before I break for some questions is that now that we have wrapped this up, expect in your mailbox in the next 24 hours a survey to come through, getting your feedback for this webinar. This is our first time actually doing a mask-making webinar, so thank you for bearing with us, but I hope you'll also give your feedback on what was helpful, what you needed to know more about, if there was a piece that we didn't get to that you really want to know about. And if you have any suggestions for a future mask-making webinar or adoption identity webinar, we certainly would love to have your feedback. It's so helpful to us. So again, please keep an eye out in your mailbox for that, and I hope you'll take a few minutes to answer our questions. And that being said, if you have any questions for me, please write that in your GoToWebinar pop-up. Should be right under the question tab, and I'm happy to help if there's any questions. We have just a few more minutes left in the webinar overall, but I am very happy to hold on until we officially end in another 8 or so minutes. So that being said, if anyone needs to get going, I understand. But again, I'll hang on the line for any questions that may come up. Okay, so I do have a question that just came through. It says, do you have plans to do a mask-making workshop open to those outside the mentorship program? So to be honest, we don't have anything calendared for that to happen, but absolutely, if there's an interest for that to happen, we'll make it happen and make sure we get that on our calendar. So that would actually be something that'd be super helpful to capture in the survey that goes out. If you can make a note of that, that's something that you'd really be interested in, that'll just really help us to make sure we can get that calendared for you. And that being said, if you have any specific ideas about even like a day of the week that you would want to see that happen, or a particular age range that you think that'd be most helpful for, please let us know, and that'd be so helpful for us. But as long as the interest is there, we'll make sure that we do get that on the calendar. Okay, not a question, but some nice feedback from one of our listeners who just said that this was a helpful workshop for her, helpful webinar, I should say. So again, that being said, I'm glad to hear it, and I hope that we can continue to do similar resources. And so again, if there's anything in particular that would be helpful for us to cover, whether in a webinar or in a physical session, please don't hesitate to let us know. So at this point, I think maybe I will wrap things up because I see we're down to just a few people at this point. So certainly if you do have any further questions, there is an email up on the screen right now. You can always shoot us an email to let us know if you have any other feedback or ideas. Again, please keep an eye out in your own email for information about a survey that will really help us a lot. And I really just want to take a moment to thank you for joining us tonight. I know it can be really hard to make the time to attend something like this, especially on a weeknight, especially on a Monday. So thank you so much. I hope this was helpful and valuable, and can't wait to hear your feedback soon. So again, my name is Katie Rogala. If you need anything, please reach out to us at Spence-Chapin, and thank you for making the time to be with us tonight. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.